This is Paul Johnson with New Frontiers. Now, today we have an exciting podcast with our guest, Sean Nobel. Sean and I have been on opposite sides of a lot of issues. And at the end of this podcast, we're going to talk about one of them, which is kind of the dark money issue. But I have found Sean, as I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, of being a person with high integrity and incredibly smart. Now, he's going to give you in many ways how the Republican Party see things. We're going to talk about a wide variety of different issues, ranging from budget to how it is that we can change politics. We're even going to talk a little bit about are Republicans really ready to overthrow government if elections don't go their ways. I think you'll like it. But if you're really interested in change, which again we talk about in this podcast, I want to update you on the Arizona Independent Party. Now, as I said on this podcast before, we have a party that is on the ballot. It was part of the No Labels party. It was put on the ballot by them. But we just changed the name and it was approved by the Secretary of State. Now, if you want to register as a member of this party, you literally just go to your motor vehicles division in Arizona, and we're right there as one of the 4 parties that you can register. But most importantly, what this party is about is healing. It's about trying to find a way to pull these two sides back together. I say during this podcast, it's like your house is on fire and the 2 individuals who are out in the front that are supposed to be here to save you, they're arguing about who lit the match. Well, my house is on fire. Let's fix that. This country, in many ways, is on fire, and we need people who can pull us together. If you're interested in doing that and you live in Arizona, we need good candidates who are willing to run. You can contact me at paul@optamerican.com, and I'll get you back information about how you too could become a candidate. In any event, if you like what it is that we're doing here on this podcast, go ahead and press that subscribe button and let's get on with this show.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, I am very excited to have our guest with us today, Sean Nobel. I've heard about Sean Nobel for years, but it's only been in the last couple of years that I feel like I got to know him a little bit. I got to go on his podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Light Beard, Dark Money.
Yeah, Light Beard, Dark Money. So but Sean is almost infamous in the Arizona market. He doesn't know this. I did kind of know of him a little bit. I believed you worked with John Shattuck. You were his chief of staff for number of years. And my story with John Shattuck was John Shattuck got me into trouble because in his very first campaign, I was mayor, and I had a person that I went out to see speak, and the person was a Lyndon LaRouche. And this Lyndon LaRouche got done saying at the end of the spiel that she didn't have anything against Jews, even though they controlled all the money. So I was like, I'm out, right? So I ended up calling this guy I don't even know, John Shattuck, and I tell him if he wants any help, I'll help him. Well, he put me in one of his TV ads. He asked me to cut a TV ad for him, and then I ended up getting my brains beat out of me by the Democratic Party because I didn't realize they had rules that said, well, even if they don't like Jews, it's okay by us. You just can't be a Republican.
Right. Exactly.
So in any event, also, I've gotten to know you, and I've enjoyed just being able to listen to you. You're one of the brightest guys I've actually met in politics, and just like to tell you thank you for coming on our show.
Well, that's a high honor and very flattering. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be here.
All right, and then we have our New Zealander. He's not in New Zealand today. He's been riding his bike around Tempe. He got his roof blown off of his house with a microburst. Tell us what happened, Henry.
Yeah, we had an interesting week last week. I guess we were in Florida for like 45 minutes or something. We had this crazy tropical storm come through Tempe, and it ripped the roof off of our house here. So we've got a major repair job. I guess I'm going to be talking to my insurance agent a lot over the next months. So yeah, wild weather here in ASU.
Yeah, and you said like it was the whole roof was sitting in your neighbor's lawn or something, right?
Yeah, about half the roof ended up lying on my neighbor's front yard across the street. It's crazy. There's multiple trees down on people's houses, and People move to Arizona because it's not supposed to have this weather. What's going on, guys? This is not part of the deal.
Yeah.
The thing about Arizona weather is it usually is almost always good. And then, we'll have these years where every bridge between Phoenix and Tempe is knocked out. You can't drive between the two places. We just have weird things that happen. It's not normal. So, well, Bob, thanks for being on our show today. Again, my favorite columnist.
Always good to be with you.
All right, so I am going to take advantage of asking the first couple of questions here. And my first question, obviously, is going to go to Sean. Sean has a lot of background in politics, as I stated here in the introduction. He worked for John Shattuck for a number of years. He understands the Republican Party, I think, very well. He's also been involved in a variety of different funding and initiative issues over the years. But Sean, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the environment that we're finding ourselves in. I find it stranger by the day. All the things that I knew about politics don't seem to apply anymore. And I don't know if it's just an old age thing I have going on with me, or if there really is a dramatic change that seems to be happening. Give me your take of what's happening in the political environment today between Democrats and Republicans, and what's happening with Trump and the entire situation. How do you see it?
So I think I'd start with for many years, there's a traditional Republican Party that kind of, didn't really change that much. And the demographics of the party didn't change. Who they appealed to didn't change. And we're talking going all the way back to, maybe it's even before Nixon, but let's say Nixon through Reagan and on to Bush 1 and then Bush 2. It was, economic conservatives. It was the religious conservatives, pro-life community, and the national security conservatives, So those are the three main pillars of what the party was about. And there wasn't, I think as a result of the Bush era, we had a situation in which we got involved in a lot of overseas conflict, because of 9/11. And that started to wear on, even conservatives' psyche on like, what are we doing here? This is a lot of effort. It feels like we're not really making progress. Then Bush, the economy falters pretty badly with the bubble at the end of the Bush term in 2008. Obama gets elected. And, I remember all of the headlines across, Time Magazine, at Washington Post, everywhere was like, the Republican Party is dead forever. It's like, they're gone. This is now a whole new, generation. And then you have the advent of Trump, who tapped into a populism that was kind of that undercurrent where you had a lot of people feeling left behind because of the way things were going on with the two parties. And he happened to run under the Republican banner and, rode that, populism wave into the White House, much to the surprise of the vast majority of conventional wisdom thinkers, right? I mean, basically everybody was surprised except the people who voted for him. They're like, oh yeah, I knew he was going to win, because they just had this visceral reaction to him. And then there was a kind of a little bit of a backlash. COVID happens. Biden gets elected because I think in part, there was just a lot of like the overreach that people saw in the first Trump administration, the Democrats pushing back hard, the advent of mail-in ballots. We had record turnout in the 2000 election and 2020 election. I think people don't realize how many voters, in addition to the typical, there were 8 million more voters in that election than a typical presidential election, because it was much more easy to vote because of the COVID restriction issues and mail-in ballots, that kind of thing. So then you had the Biden not proving himself, gets replaced by Kamala, and Trump gets back in. So the Republican Party's gone through this arrangement of becoming more of the populist party. And now the Democrats have decided, oh, wait a minute. If they're going to be the populist party, we got to be the populist party, but we're going to be the populist party from the hard left rather than the hard right. So we're going to be the communist, and the nanny state party. And so you see the advent of Mondami in New York running for mayor. He's likely going to win, and other very progressive candidates that are moving the Democratic Party away from its kind of norms. And so the Republican Party's already been taken away from its norms by Trump, and now the Democrat Party is being taken away from its norms. And so I think what I look at into the future is there's going to have to be some type of normalization. And the question is, where does the middle go? And will they stay within one or the other parties in the next 2, 6, 8 years? And I think that's an open question.
My theory on this, Sean, is that what Trump has done is he's moved to the left. I mean, you can look at it on the war issue, on not being involved in becoming a little more of an isolationist, what he's doing economically, everything from taking ownership in companies to the tariff issue. He's moving to the left. And what he's done is he's left only one of two grounds for the Democrats. Either, well, three, they could be the same as him. That's one choice. The other choice is they could move over to his right, but that would mean that they'd have to stand for free markets and free trade and free enterprise, or they can move further to the left. And I think what Mamdani is I think he's a prediction of the future of the Democratic Party. There's no place else for them to go because they are not going to go to the right of him politically. And I think what that gives Trump is even if it messes up with tariffs and everything else, he can say, well, you may not like me, but you don't want these socialists, do you? These self-admitted socialists. I think it might be a successful strategy for Democrats in isolated markets, but I think it's devastating for them nationally. I think it's devastating for them here in Arizona because I think that free markets and free enterprise have proved very well for people in Arizona. We've all done exceptionally well over the economy since 1990, at least 1992, when we began to have the WTO, when we began to focus more on free trade. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. It's interesting because one of the things that Trump has done, because Trump has moved left, I mean, it's one of those classic moments where I'm talking to someone who is a longtime Democrat and fairly liberal. And they're like, these tariffs are outrageous. I'm like, wait a minute. 5 months ago, you would have been all for tariffs. But the only reason that you're against them is because Trump is for them. And so in some ways, he's basically gone to their ground, said, oh, I'm for this. I dare you to be with me. And they can't stomach it, as you point out. So they go left. And because you're right. I don't think they're going to go right. And for whatever reason, they are incapable of agreeing with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is antithetical to them. And that's going to be that's going to be what is fatal for their party, as you point out, because here in Arizona, I mean, we are a bit of a populist state. We are definitely the Wild West, and we're rugged individualists, and we believe in markets. I mean, everyone wants to succeed. And this is a place where a lot of people, come to find their dream. And so I think the Democrat reaction to Trump is going to make it harder for them as a party nationally to continue to be in power.
Yeah, and I can tell you, in being a candidate or having been a candidate in the Democratic Party, there is, for a long time, there's been a progressive base. It's gotten stronger over the years, but it's always been there. So the challenge that the Democratic candidate has is what they should do in Arizona is speak up against Mamdani, because he definitely does not represent the independent and the middle ground, the mainstream voter in Arizona. But if they do, they start to lose their progressive base,
right,
and they end up where Kyrsten Sinema ended up, right? Being so squeezed out on the left that they can't be successful. I mean, if we go back to Kyrsten Sinema, they gave her a lot of grief. She wasn't talking about any right-wing ideals. She was talking about mainly mainstream things. But what happened was that undercut her base, and all of a sudden she couldn't survive a primary. I think that's the lesson that most Democratic politicians in Arizona are taking away. And in the end, it's problematic for them.
Yeah, she really is the emblematic of what has happened to the Democratic Party. I mean, someone who was willing to stand up and say what she was for, and sometimes it was against what the base Democrats wanted, but she knew that it was better for their party if they went this direction. I mean, the fact that she was just eviscerated for protecting the filibuster is just mind-boggling to me, because imagine, I mean, she's been vindicated hundreds of times since that, because I mean, the only reason that we have, I mean, for example, the only reason we have a shutdown right now is because she protected the filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
I see it similarly, but I would probably use a little bit of different language and descriptions. The Republican Party has been remade, and it's no longer a traditional conservative party or a business-oriented Republican Party. It is a populist nationalist party, and it will be so long as Trump is its dominant and almost exclusive figure. He defines what the party stands for now. There may be an opening for a debate about the future of the Republican Party post-Trump, but until then, it's settled. It is a populist nationalist party, and Trump defines what populist nationalism consists of, just as he defines what America First is, while doing all sorts of non-American first things, like taking responsibility for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Democratic Party has also become, for the most part, a European-style social democratic party. I don't think it has gone fully socialist, even though there are some self-proclaimed socialists who are gaining great traction within internal democratic circles. But even Bernie Sanders isn't really a socialist, even though he declares himself to be. He doesn't call for the government takeover of the high ground of the economy. He's for a much more elaborate social welfare state and much higher regulation of markets and much higher taxes on the affluent. That doesn't constitute socialism. That is European-style social democracy. And I don't think at this point there's a lot of debate within the Democratic Party about what it stands for. I think that's where it is. Elizabeth Warren, I think, is kind of the center of today's Democratic Party. It is.
I love how nonchalant Bob says this. Elizabeth Warren's the center of the party. Like, no big deal.
Well, I think she is, and I think that's been
good God,
demonstrated. That leaves a huge number of people unrepresented. And that's why we get a toggling back and forth between the two parties. Neither party can maintain control beyond one election cycle. We've had unified government since Reagan's first term, only for 4 consecutive years one time. Other than that, every time a political party has had unified control of the presidency in both chambers of Congress, they've lost it in the very next election. Right. Because there's so many people who are outside that dynamic, and they keep toddling back and forth, dissatisfied with whoever's currently in charge.
Well, and I think an interesting point to make to that point that Bob points out, because it's true that the only stability in the unified control for that 4 years he talks about was as a result of 9/11. It was the elections of 2000 that got Bush the presidency, and we had the House and the Senate, and then we lost that in 2006 because so it was really, it wasn't anything that the party did. It was the fact that the country was so unified as a result of being attacked on 9/11 that goodwill kept everything kind of status quo until the 2006 election.
I think it'd be interesting to hear more from Sean, but also from you, Paul, about more of an insider story about these developments, because often on the show we talk about primaries, we talk about what voters want, sometimes we talk about candidates, but what's going on the inside of these parties, especially around donors, interest groups, lobby groups that are sort of forming some of the skeleton of these parties. They must, to some degree, have some influence in which direction the party is going. So what happened, Sean, on the right? What happened to all these interest groups, whether it's the NRA or the farm lobby or chambers of commerce? How did they lose control of the party? And now that we've had Trump around for so many years, are there new organizations that have arisen that really are getting what they want from this system, that are powerful? I don't know whether, kind of populist organizations like Turning Point, or what's going on. How could those organizations' grip on the party be broken to allow this populist transition to happen?
Well, I think it was in part just the power of Trump and his absolute, transformation, as Bob talked about, that this is a populist nationalist party. When you have a populist nationalist party, you don't tend to have interest groups that have much influence because it is antithetical to some degree. There is not a business, as Bob said, there's not really a business component. So while Trump has individual business owners and businessmen who are, loyal to him, the vast majority of what he's accomplishing through the business community is done out of just pure either fear or this is opportunity that I'm going to take. I mean, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg and Bezos and others, I mean, Elon Musk is a unique situation, but the others, they're doing this because they feel like they have to keep their business, growing. I think Elon, because he is very, from a philosophical standpoint, having been someone who was very much in the, let's take advantage of government subsidies to do green energy. And, so the solar stuff he was doing, the EV stuff he's doing. But I think that because of how hard left the Democrats have become, the progressive nature, that repelled him into supporting Trump. I think the assassination attempt was kind of the thing that just tripped everybody, right? That was the moment when you saw that. I think that's the moment that Zuckerberg, I think this moment Joe Rogan, I think it's the moment Elon Musk. I think that's the moment everyone was like, wait a minute, this is nuts. The anti-Trump stuff has gone too far. We're going with this guy. And that was, I think evident that, after that, it didn't matter whether Biden stayed on the ticket or if it was Kamala, Trump was going to win the election.
Yeah, and my read is with Donald Trump, first, I think he's a very shrewd player, but at the same time, I think today, I don't think this has always been true, but I think today both parties are driven by grievances. Trump, being a shrewd player, figured out in 2016 he had to break through that blue wall. And on the other side of that blue wall were a whole bunch of gun-toting, religiously oriented men and women who were in organized labor, right? And they were upset. They did not reap the same benefits in their mind of globalism and of free trade that places like Arizona did, places like California did, places like the South did. That group, I campaigned there multiple times, and I can tell you it was very depressing, especially in the rural parts of those states. Well, by his talking about tariffs in that first campaign, he was able to break that blue wall, and that changed the election for him. Now, Democrats, I see as being a little bit different. And by the way, I have friends that are Republicans and Democrats deep in the party, and I'm not trying to slight either one of them as individuals or as human beings. But I can tell you one of the motivating factors for the base in the Democratic Party is they hate profit. They really have a challenge with people who have been successful in business, and they frame it in terms of greed. And if it just weren't for greed, and if it just weren't for profit, government could go in and do these things. And if government did them, it would create a better return for us. So for the most part, they don't want a healthcare system that's a free market healthcare system. They want a healthcare system that's run by government. If you look at their models, model after model, you will see that to be true. Well, on the Republican side, Trump has taken them to the point where it's the global elite that is the bad guy. That's who their grievance is against. On the Democratic Party, it's the billionaires. It's the people who have successfully gotten to the top. Now, my own theory, and I mean, obviously I'm working on this with the political party, I think there's huge ground on both sides. I mean, you almost could be a free trader and support free elections, and you're in the middle, right? Because you can capture both of those two grounds, which have been abandoned in large part by both sides. The challenge is that I believe if you don't create a challenge for the two parties on free markets, free trade, free enterprise, balanced budgets, they're not going to come back and try to take that ground, because from Trump's side, he's just taking it for granted. And on the Democratic side, fundamentally, their base doesn't like it.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, that's not where they are.
Something we talked about here on the show before, which is my hypothesis, which is they have to run the car into the wall. And Bob and I have talked about this before as well. Things have to get bad before people are going to come back to these policies that have proven successful in the past. And the question is, how bad does the economy have to get? How bad do other problems have to get, whether it's with the healthcare system or with the military or whatever it is, before people say, oh, wait, actually, maybe we do need these old commitments to really boring things like social order and the rule of law and free trade and free markets. That's my hypothesis, is that it's going to have to hurt a little bit before people come back around. The question is just how much it's going to have to.
I fear that when we get to a point where the economy is so bad that people are like, oh, we have to fix this, that the first tendency is going to be it's got to be government that fixes it. That there's not going to be a natural like, oh, we got to go back to the markets. Do you worry that even people who have traditionally been free market oriented, we get to a point where, oh, we need the government to step in and fix this?
I think that's a serious danger, and at present, even a likely outcome. We had a huge period of stagflation during the 1970s. It was a terrible decade for the economy. But there was an opportunity for someone who made the critique that the problem needed to be resolved by a return to sound money and free enterprise, Ronald Reagan, to win a Republican primary and then win a general election. I don't know in today's Republican Party whether Ronald Reagan could win a primary.
That's such a great point.
The problem is, at present, there isn't a political vehicle for that point of view to have a chance to win and make that case. I think that's the biggest problem. If we had that opportunity, I think we could win the argument again. But I don't know that we have a Republican Party which is open to that point of view.
The only one I see that maybe would be willing to do it is J.D. Vance. Or excuse me, not J.D. Vance, I'm sorry, Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio, yeah. You and I are thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that he seems to be more inclined. J.D. Vance is going to go maybe even further than Trump. And where I disagree with you, Henry, not disagree with you, but the assumption that we're going to come back to it, here's what really happens. The economy goes bad, and Trump begins to talk about why he didn't get what he wanted, whether it's the Federal Reserve or the liberals didn't open government back up or whatever. He blames them. And of course, what Democrats do is they begin to say, you know what it is? It's this AI technology. It's these people who are creating these new technologies that are costing us all our jobs. they're going to go right back to blaming it on the billionaires. You can bet on that. That's going to be their go-to. And in the meantime, I think unless we either get a vastly different Republican candidate, and again, maybe Marco Rubio would be that guy, or we start to create a challenge for both of those two parties where they have to appeal to that group on the other side or risk losing them. And if they risk losing them, they will go back and try to take that ground back over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a strong possibility. I do think that, it's clearly looking into the crystal ball of the post-Trump era, the two people who are the most set up are J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, I think, has done an astounding job being given so many different responsibilities and working in an environment in which he is not trusted. I mean, the thing that's wild to me is that he's still not trusted by some of the closest Trump advisors because of the primary in 2015, 16. And the fact that he's done what he's done in those kinds of circumstances, I think, is remarkable. I think J.D. Vance has been a much better vice president than I expected. And I would have to say he's probably got the inside track because he is the vice president and he does seem to be more aligned with Trump's view of the world globally and in the kind of the nuances. And so I don't know how this plays out because again, it may be that the Republicans are going to enjoy success in the next presidential election and the one after that, because the Democrats have not figured out how to deal with coming back to some sanity.
I would offer a dissent. Marco Rubio as the potential savior, even before he became Trumpified. He wasn't a free market advocate. He was an advocate of industrial policy and shared the critique that the free market wasn't producing, particularly for young males without a college education.
Yeah,
and he favored government intervention to do that. I think it needs to be someone outside of the current circle. There are some potential gubernatorial candidates or governors that could perhaps seize that if the opportunity presents itself. And that's where Reagan came from. He was a former governor. Youngkin, I think, would be a far more likely champion of that point of view than anyone who's ever been associated with Trump.
Yeah, I totally agree. Youngkin has got to be near the top of that list of the outside governors who can carry that banner.
Yeah, it seems to me, I mean, it shouldn't be lost on any of us that Trump also came from the outside, and Trump reformed the Republican Party. So the idea that it can't be reformed, I think that's incorrect. I think it could be reformed, but it's going to take somebody with the same amount of backbone and the same amount of grit. I mean, I'm not a Trump fan, but I don't deny him the attributes that he has. And one of the attributes that he had is the ability to go in and reform the Republican primary to his will. He did it over a period of time, but you could watch that gain momentum. And I think in a bad economy, maybe a Youngkin could. Now, the reason I went to Marco Rubio is I really think it's going to come down in a primary to one of those two, Vance or Rubio. Rubio's been shaking hands around the world. Vance has been shaking hands state to state. That's just what happens with a vice president. I think a vice president has a clear advantage anytime they run in a primary, a clear advantage. I said back during the Democratic primary, I thought Joe Biden was going to win it. But the reason for it is many years ago, I helped a guy named Gary Hart. We're running against a guy named Walter Mondale. And it was amazing to me how almost impossible it was to overcome the idea that he had been vice president and he had gone out and broken ground on 1,000 projects across the country with governor after governor and built up this support group. And at the end of the day, it really still is politics. The fact that you have a relationship with the governor or mayor or other people, that plays a huge role in building up a campaign that can last across the country.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, politics is personal, and personal relationships matter a lot. And I've seen firsthand candidates who think that they're going to have the support of someone who they consider very close, and they don't get it, and it is devastating. And I also know that there are people who, would think that, oh, this person's going to get this guy's support, but they don't recognize that the personal relationship they have with the other guy is more important than the alignment they may have philosophically on the other side. So personal relationships are super important. And it is, it's proof that being the vice president is actually valuable. It's not who was it that said it was no better than a bucket of warm spit? I mean, it's definitely worth more than that because it gives you the chance to develop these relationships. And I mean, I think that's largely why Kamala Harris was able to coalesce within 24 hours. She had everybody on board, even though Schumer and Pelosi and the Obamas were kind of wanting this mini primary. She had that shut down in a day because of the relationships that she had developed as vice president.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing. So what do you think when you look back on that race? Was that just a foregone conclusion that Trump was going to win it, or did Kamala have any chance in your mind after she got into the race?
I don't think she had any chance. It was a foregone conclusion. I think that it would have taken the idea of being able to run as the successor to a president who was viewed as largely a failure by most Americans. I know that the Democrats thought he was just the best thing since sliced bread until he wasn't. She didn't have the ability to separate herself, but also run on the things that he was successful at. So, it was this Hobson's choice. Do I carry on? I mean, it actually, the moment I knew that this election was over was I was walking my kids in my neighborhood, and I saw that, and there was a person who had been very much a Democrat, had a Biden sign in their yard for the months leading up to it. Biden drops out, Kamala gets in, and one of the signs is a Kamala sign that says, finish the job. And the other Kamala sign says, looking forward. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, for the future, and we're going to finish the job. So she, her campaign itself didn't have a coherent message. And you get saddled with that situation. It's very, very difficult. I mean, 107 days is not a lot of time to run a presidential campaign. I mean, the amount of money that was wasted was astounding.
Yeah, and my own personal opinion in watching Kamala, I agree with you. I think the odds were stacked against her, maybe from the point in time that the assassination attempt took place. I think there was a big shift in momentum there. But while I think, I don't want to completely trash her campaign, I think that there are things that she did that were unbelievable to me. One of the starting points was that Robert F. Kennedy wanted to meet with her. I can't believe she wouldn't meet with him. And to give Donald Trump credit, he jumped in there and did that meeting, right? Elon Musk, that was an obvious. The Biden administration in many ways was persecuting Elon Musk. That was causing them a problem, not just with Musk, but with people who kind of like Elon Musk, who saw him as being this tech guy that had delivered a lot of different types of products to him. That, to me, was an obvious meeting. I think he probably would have gone with Trump anyway, but you certainly go out and you make an attempt with it with somebody like him. And then she, when she was asked on the podcast, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? You would think that would have been 101 the very first day when they knew she was going to be the nominee, because that was going to be the question. I maybe they didn't see it, but it was clear to me Joe Biden had become very unpopular with a large portion of independents. And when you added on top of it that debate performance where it became very clear they've been lying to us, that she had to have some way to differentiate herself. So I saw all these mistakes that Henry says all the time politics is won on the margin, and that's exactly how I see it. You both come with a base, and then you start picking up these margins all the way along. I don't think she ran a great campaign. I think she ran fundamentally a campaign that raised $1.5 billion. That's awesome. I mean, and raising $1.5 billion is amazing. And, certainly I think it was joy was their original campaign slogan or something along that line. But they
laughing,
never
Bob.
really answered the question of who are you? Pardon?
Bob just started laughing immediately at that slogan. I mean, I think it's very rude. I think that's very rude.
Okay, Bob. Tell us what you think.
I don't know whether Sean would agree with this or not, but in my view, major campaigns that get a lot of attention tend to be decided on just a very small number of big issues. And when you have an incumbent president, the next election tends to be a referendum on that president. And I think the 2024 presidential election was always going to be a referendum on the Biden administration, irrespective of whether Biden was the candidate, and certainly if his vice president was the candidate. And that toggling that we discussed about what the swing voters do once they're dissatisfied with the status quo is to give the other guy a shot, and it often doesn't matter who the other guy is. And I think in terms of a hopeful note potentially for Democrats, I think 2026 and 2028 become a referendum on the Trump administration. And I think the state of the economy is his Achilles heel. Inflation has not been tamed. And as the Biden administration hurt itself badly by saying inflation was temporary, it wasn't that big of a deal, and we need to spend a whole bunch more government money. Trump saying, the Trump administration is saying inflation's not a problem. Well, the American people believe that inflation remains a serious problem. And his tariffs are stagnating the American economy by injecting huge amounts of uncertainty. I don't think he escapes that in 2026 and 2028. And I think the Republicans are going to have difficulty not making those two elections a referendum on the Trump administration.
Yeah, I agree with that. That if the tax cut isn't enough to overcome the drag that some of these tariff policies are having on the economy, it's going to have some serious impact. I think going back to the 2024 election, the referendum, I think, is exactly right. But the one piece that I think some people overlook is, and this I think was important this is how Trump got the popular vote and won the electoral college as handily as he did, is that it was on those margins. Typically, the Democrats will lean in on the abortion issue as their cultural issue to keep suburban women in the camp. And the Dobbs decision in 2022, I think, took a little sting out of that. And the thing that ended up hurting Kamala more than anything with suburban women was her position on the transgender issue. And the ad that the Trump the Trump campaign ran about her talking about taxpayers paying for transgender surgeries for prisoners and illegal aliens, and that Kamala's for they, them, and Trump is for you, was absolutely devastating to her campaign.
I agree. Yeah, and there was no response.
None.
There was just zero response to it. And I thought that was a devastating moment for her. And I agree with you on the popular vote. It may have been baked in more at the electoral college than it was at the popular vote, but I think the popular vote began to shift during that campaign. And it was in large part because of what she wasn't doing. What constituencies in 2026 and 2028 do you think are up for grabs by either party?
I think the swing voters are likely to be concerned about the state of the economy and hold it against the Republicans and regard it as a referendum on the Trump administration. The Republicans are they're investing in this transgender issue. So they're going to try to reverse it with culture and the blame game, Paul, as you described it. I think that has more traction when you're the challenger than when you're defending home court and people are dissatisfied with the state of the economy. So I don't look at so much in terms of demographic groups as looking at the ticket splitters who in our current national and particularly in Arizona political demography determine the outcome of elections. Ticket splitters have determined the outcome of major races in Arizona for the last 4 election cycles. And that was a new phenomenon as of 2018. It was more base turnout elections up to that point in time. Since then, there's been hundreds of thousands of ticket splitters in each of our elections. And the ticket splitters don't like MAGA. Trump is the only MAGA candidate who has won a major high publicity race in Arizona since 2018, and he lost in 2020. And the one in Arizona, the one caveat to that is that the Democrats have just sunk in terms of voter registration. In 2022, when Katie Hobbs defeated Kari Lake, the Republican registration advantage was 4 percentage points of the electorate. It's now over 7 percentage points. And the Republicans, in terms of just raw numbers, have increased their registration advantage like 150,000 voters or so over the Democrats. And Hobbs defeated Lake by only 17,000 votes. So the one caveat in terms of this being a referendum on the Trump administration is that Democrats between now and the general election need to seriously reduce that Republican registration advantage because despite the increasing number of swing voters, partisan affiliation continues to be the largest predictor of voter behavior by a long shot.
Talking about demographic groups, I do wonder about how loyal these working class Latino voters are going to be to Trump. You know, there was a lot of talk after the 2020 election about Black and Latino working class voters, especially men, going over to the Republicans. But if the cost of living increases continue, if the economy remains kind of stagnant and those people are not getting ahead, they're not going to be very positively disposed towards the Republicans. And, you know, the ICE raids are having real effects on the working class Latino communities in Phoenix and in other places, right? That a lot of people are worried they're not going out, leaving their homes to work in the way they may have done before. So I do wonder about how loyal those working class voters are going to be to the Republicans in 2 or 4 years.
My take is if Democrats do nothing and they don't have a third party, bad news, you're going to have a third party. But if you didn't have a third party, the answer would be, it probably is just enough for the things that Trump is doing, that he's ending up on the news on, the abuses that seem to be happening with ICE, the issues that are happening with the retribution agenda, the challenges that are happening in the economy. It probably is just enough that they could ink it out. I'm not sure they'll ink it out on all their races, but I could see where that could happen. The thing that I would have said to them is, wait a minute, there are real constituency groups out there up for grabs. The free traders, the free market people, the people who like a balanced budget. Why not start talking about a smaller government? Bigger government doesn't seem to be working for you. At the same time, Katie Hobbs is going to have to deal with this issue, and it's going to be a big issue, which is, yeah, okay, we can blame Donald Trump on the economy. How come we went from 3rd to 47th in job growth? Right? It doesn't make sense if this is all Donald Trump that
Right.
we've seen such a drop here in our local market. And I think that's devastating for them. In fact, I personally think if they hold the line and stay with their existing candidate, which is what I think they're going to do, I think they have a better than odds chance of losing. Now, I think she thinks that to be true also, and I think privately she's praying at night that Andy Biggs wins, because I think she believes, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I think she believes that running against a pure MAGA person is her best potential of being able to win.
I think she believes that. I mean, I'm biased because I'm supporting Andy Biggs, but I actually think that he has more appeal to the middle than Karen Robeson because he's more authentic. I do think that the philosophy, when he was state Senate president, he was not a hardcore MAGA type because it didn't exist back then. And I think that what you'll see from his campaign is a coming back to let's find the way that we're going to govern Arizona, to make it successful. And I think that the fact that the job creation numbers have plummeted is a big issue. The other thing that I think is unique to Arizona, and maybe it's not just Arizona, but in speaking about Arizona, and this goes to the Democrat playbook that you see over and over and over again for the last number of years, is that they always lean in on the abortion issue. Now, here in Arizona, that has been taken away because abortion is enshrined in the Constitution, and so there's nothing that anybody can do about it. And so the Democrats really don't have the ability to use the abortion issue against Republicans here in Arizona. And I also think that that's true in blue states where abortion is not at risk. And so when you look at like House rate, the House majority, those issues that they typically use against Republicans, he's going to be supportive of overturning Roe v. Wade. Not that a House member has anything to do with it, but they use that issue. That's gone now. And so I think that creates a problem for Democrats because they don't know how to campaign without the abortion issue. I mean, that's been a central tenet of their attacks on Republicans for decades. And it'll be very interesting to see what they come up with because at this point, I don't see anything that is as compelling for getting suburban women because they haven't abandoned the trans issue. I think they continue to be vulnerable on that.
Yeah, and you say don't know how to campaign. I challenge anybody, go take a look for long form content that Governor Hobbs has been involved with. You won't find it, right? And because I've looked to try to find like, okay, what works here? My guess is because she doesn't feel like she can do that. And I'm going to go back to saying this. You win these races on the margins. When you have a tough competitive election, there are a whole bunch of constituency groups out there that you can be going after. But if you're so concerned that you have to save your base, what do? Shut up and go silent. That's what you do. And that's what they're doing around the country. Yeah. I happen to think that is a very, very poor strategy. I think the better strategy would be go compete on those other groups.
Totally agree.
I don't know, Paul. Let me give a slight dissent with a slight Bob Robb tilt to it.
Yeah, we've learned a lot from him. So,
which is that a lot of what Trump is doing could go wrong. Whether it's the tariffs that could cause a lot of inflation, whether the Ukraine issue or the Israel issue blows up again, and he's now, quite intimately involved in some of those things. And then there are any number of other things that could go wrong, right? This is politics. In that case, the Democrats are going to benefit from just not being the person in charge, right? I think that we shouldn't overinterpret the disarray of the Democratic Party. I mean, I have my skepticism about whether they can recover, either because I've watched the Labour Party in Britain and the Social Democratic Party in Germany and the Socialists in France kind of just slide into complete, in some cases, complete disarray and almost not existing anymore. But I'm not sure whether that's what's going on with the Democrats. So I'd say hold off. If we get to the start of next year, or especially after the midterms and the disarray seems to continue, then we can start making more firm prognoses. But there's a lot of events that could happen that this could just fall in their lap. This could just fall in their lap.
I don't doubt that at all. Sean, I'm going to go back and ask you a question on the race with David Schweikert getting into it, Andy Biggs, Karen Robeson both being there. What's your analysis of that? Did David, who do you think David helped and hurt getting into the gubernatorial primary? And do you think he stays with it throughout the entire cycle?
Great question. So I will say at the outset, the person that helped the most was David Schweikert because he needed an excuse to leave the House. If he had just said, "Oh, I'm going to retire," he would have, they would have. They're not happy with him because he's now made a seat that he could win, vulnerable to the Democrats. And I think he decided that by running for governor, it gives him something to go do as an excuse to leave the House. There is no lane for him in the governor's race. And in as much as he impacts the race, I think he does damage to Robeson more than Biggs.
Why is
just
that?
Because he's not a MAGA guy, and as much as Robeson is trying to pretend to be the MAGA person, it doesn't really wear well. I mean, I think most people who know Karen know that that's not really who she is. And so if they're like, well, if she's going to pretend to be MAGA, then I'll go with the non-MAGA person in Schweikert. I don't think there's anybody that's a Biggs person that says, "Oh, Schweikert's in? Oh, good. All right. I'm going with Schweikert." I literally can't think of anybody as I think through, the handful of people I know in the world that is like, oh, no one. I mean, I guess all you had to do is look at the Twitter reaction when Schweikert got in. I mean, it was pretty quiet. Not that Twitter is real life. Right?
Yeah, I actually make a practice of never reading my Twitter.
I think there is a lane for Schweikert, but I don't think it adds up to a plurality. I believe that there is a fairly substantial number of disaffected Republicans who are still registered Republicans who vote in a Republican primary, but are not only not MAGA, they're opposed to MAGA. But I don't think they add up to a plurality, even if the MAGA vote is split evenly between two candidates trying to run in that lane. And his tactical argument, which is that I'm the guy who has won contested races. I can reverse this 4-cycle history of Republicans losing the major races, is simply nothing that appeals to the MAGA base. So getting people who prefer a MAGA candidate to say, "Hey, I need to go in a different direction because I'm tired of losing." I mean, these are people who chose Mark Fitcham as the Secretary of State Republican nominee over Bo Lane, who would be Secretary of State today if he had been nominated. So that tactical argument, at least heretofore, has gained no traction whatsoever. And I do believe, since he's running explicitly in the non-MAGA lane, he hurts Robeson, who has been counting on sort of covertly and by osmosis gaining that vote. And I agree with Sean that she has an authenticity problem. And Schweikert running explicitly in that lane accentuates that problem and takes from her that kind of default non-MAGA vote that she's been counting on. It didn't work against Carrie Lake. I don't think it works against Andy Biggs, and it particularly doesn't work if Schweikert's explicitly running in that lane and trying directly to appeal to those voters.
Bob, would you agree that it hurts Karen more than Andy Biggs if you had to make a guess?
Yes.
That's interesting. All right. So, Sean, let me do a little setup on this question if I can, because I'm interested in your thought. You know the Republican base better than most people I know. And so I'd like to have your thoughts on this. And the question is going to come down to, when I get done with this, are Republicans or the Republican base really willing to overturn a free election? And what I see happening right now is, if you look at the issue of crime inside the big cities, I don't think most of the mayors who are confronting, and most of the governors who are confronting Trump on sending in troops, are really focused on the crime issue. I think they believe, and I believe they think this genuinely, that he is trying to do a setup to eventually utilize the military as a means to try to either suppress the vote or take control of the vote. If you listen to them, they say it all the time. And I don't think it's just a line. Because of what happened on January 7th, I think there's a little bit of justification for that. But I don't care what Trump did. I'm more concerned about the actual Republican voter. Do you believe that the actual Republican voter at this point in time are so fed up with what they see that's going on the left, that if they lost an election, they'd be willing to actually overthrow it, not recognizing the downstream implications of that? Or do you think that that is just simply either a mistake or hype by the left?
I think it is in part hype by the left. I'm not saying that the left doesn't believe it. I mean, I truly believe that many on the left do actually believe that Republicans may try to overturn an election or ignore the results of an election, and in practice, it's not going to happen. The number of true election deniers is so small; they just happen to be extremely loud. But when it comes down to it, I mean, you see that. I mean, we've been the epicenter, right? And I just don't see that as something in which people would participate in. There isn't. I mean, I don't know of any Republicans who look at January 6th and say, "Yeah, that was the right thing to do." I just even people who are quote unquote election deniers, they view the January 6th. Now, the ones that are trying to justify it, they don't like it, but they'll justify it by saying, "Oh, that was a Fed operation. People just got swept up in what they were doing because these Feds were instigating this." Yeah, I mean, it turns out that there were 300 or so FBI agents, not informants, but actual FBI agents in the crowd that we didn't know about before, probably instigating things. But the fact is that at the end of the day, the vast majority of Republicans are still God-fearing, constitutional, loving people, and that is just extra constitutional. And I don't see that as any kind of a movement big enough to have impact.
And Bob, I'm going to ask you this question. I think, again, back to this smaller government, and maybe more importantly, the importance of assuring that there are rights that are granted to states as opposed to being given to the federal government. It isn't lost on me that regardless of what Trump did, we had a governor in Arizona who was a Republican who was ambitious. He wanted a career moving forward to go other places, and he wasn't willing to say yes. There were other people in the Republican legislature who weren't willing to say yes. In fact, around the country, I think we found most places, if not all of them, said, no, we're not going to overthrow the election. And that gives me some hope to believe that this really isn't a prevalent Republican thought. It might be where Donald Trump goes. I'm not going to say that he couldn't create a stir again, but I don't think fundamentally Republicans really believe that's where they want to end up.
I'm not at all that sanguine. We had an attempt to overturn an election in 2020. Two of the three Republican candidates for governor participated by denying the Electoral College votes of Arizona in Biggs's case, Pennsylvania in both Biggs and Schweikert's case. The third candidate has never been able to bring herself to say that the outcome of the 2020 election or the 2022 election were legitimate. There were brave members of the Republican Party who, including particularly here in Arizona, who stood up and prevented that from happening. Paul Boyer, Bill Gates, Rusty Bowers. Their commonality is that they now are ostracized by the Republican Party. And unless the MAGA fever breaks in some way or fashion, where Trump loses his control of what the MAGA base believes, if he asserts that the election was unfair and needs to be suspended or rerun or reversed, I believe, based upon the experience in 2020, the overwhelming majority of Republican voters and Republican office holders will go along with it. That's what happened in 2020.
I knew I should have ended with Sean. I could have left on a happy note. I wouldn't be all stressed.
My comment on this issue is, as long as so much energy on the left and the protests like we saw on the weekend is still revolving around January 6th, the 2020 election, and the threat of Trump being a fascist or overthrowing the election or whatever, they're going to keep losing, because it means that they haven't found an issue that is actually resonating with voters. I mean, Biden and then Harris, they really tried to make this threat to democracy narrative the center point of their campaigns. It just failed. People don't care. I think that elites care, and I think that they should, but I don't think that ordinary voters care. And until the Democrats can change their narrative and stop this fixation on whether elections are being carried out properly and start to reach out to voters on issues that they really care about, I think they're going to keep losing. So in a way, the frequency with which this topic keeps coming up, to me, is just an indicator of how forlorn the Democratic Party is.
Okay, so last week I said to you guys, I don't know the military, but I know politicians, and Hegseth did that speech because he's running for president. I'm now going to give you kind of what I think on the answer to this question. I'm watching Republican leaders, and I am increasingly gaining a sense that they're having discomfort with just allowing Trump to do what Trump wants to do on everything. And I think, I hope I'm right, but I very well could be wrong. I think you're going to see over the next couple of years increasingly more of them on issues that they care about, on issues that matter, that they begin to break with him. And that, to me, is the hope that you have for elections. Because at the end of the day, I really don't believe any of them, but not the ones I know anyway that are Republicans, want to overthrow an election and end democracy. But who knows? All right, so I'm gonna give you my my last question here, and it's on the dark money issue. I know you and I are on opposite sides of that equation. I think I'm a co-chairman of the opposite side, although I never know. I'm only a co-chair on paper, but whenever Terry and I go in to talk, he's the only co-chair. But whatever.
I know Terry has owned this issue, but he's dragged it along as well. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So while we may disagree, I think we have an agreement on the reason why we're both on opposite sides, right? Which is, I think you believe that what happens with free market groups is that if you don't have the ability for people to give money without having to be disclosed, that it has a suppressing effect on people's ability to have free speech. And I look at it and say, I'm worried about even people like the Kochs, who I think are strong defenders of the free markets and free trade and free enterprise. I'm worried that when they give money and they can do it without being known, they don't have to spend as much time defending those principles that they care about. I'm all for them giving as much money as they want to give. They should have the right to. It's their money. They should have the right to give the money the way that they want. But I want them to have to defend it because I think that there's a value in doing that. Talk to me about the other side of that. Why you disagree with that?
Well, I think that fundamentally, and so I'll answer the question, and then we can kind of figure out what the landscape looks like now, because it is very different than it was even just a few years ago, on the way that the dark money works. I have long held the belief that anonymous speech is something that not only is protected by the Constitution, but is important to the public debate. And, my wife criticizes me when I go all the way back to the founding, because she's like, that's not relevant now. But I use it because, James Madison was an author of the Federalist Papers that were published in New York, and he was a Virginian, and had New Yorkers been reading him knowing he was a Virginian, they would have completely dismissed what he said outright because he was a Virginian. And his ideas about the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, were able to be a part of the system because nobody knew at the time that he was the author of some of those writings. And it also goes to the ability to not face retribution, whether it's by individuals or the government. And we've seen abuses of that. One of the things that I point to is I can't remember who there was a CEO that gave $1,000 for the Prop 8 campaign in California back in 2008, which was the marriage initiative. We had the same thing here in Arizona. And, he was the CEO of a big tech company. He happened to believe in the marriage issue, gave $1,000, and he was, harassed so much that he actually ended up getting fired from being the CEO. I think that's a terrible result. I'm not into, and the conservatives who go after the left for things that they say. I disagree with that as well. I don't think that the whole, we're going to get you fired because of something you say, that's antithetical to free speech, in my opinion. Now, if an employer doesn't want their employee talking about something, that's separate. But if you're ganged up on by outside people, I don't think that's appropriate. But the way that it's changed is that back when I was, when I got the moniker Prince of Dark Money, it was because we were using C4 dollars in express advocacy situations. So we would have C4s in which we'd spend 40% of the money on express advocacy, and we'd spend 60% of the money on issue advocacy, because you couldn't spend more than 50% on express advocacy. Well, the courts have, I think it was in 2018, ruled that C4s cannot engage in express advocacy without disclosing donors. So from where I sit on the whole dark money thing, it's kind of a moot point now, although you still have a significant amount of dark money when it comes to the issue advocacy. And what you see is the vast majority of this, if you were to just stack up dark money on the conservative side and the liberal side, the liberals are significantly outspending the conservatives when it comes to dark money issue stuff at this point. I mean, all these No Kings protests were funded by left-wing dark money groups to the tune of like $200 million or $200 billion. And I mean, the amount of money that's sloshing around Arabella Fund and those guys, it is truly gone to the next level. I'll just, as an aside, say it's a little bit interesting. You point out that the overreach of the Democrats on the whole democracy thing, Henry. The average person looks at a No Kings rally and says, "Do they not understand that we don't have a king? Because if we did, they wouldn't be out there protesting. They'd be in jail."
It's one of the most confusing slogans. I saw some of the No Kings people when I was out on Saturday morning, like driving my kids home from swimming or something, and I had to stop and think, what on earth are these people on about? I don't know where they get these slogans from, but it's...
Yeah, does it mean that queens are okay?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry, you don't have a king. I do. He's great. But like, I don't know why you have to have a protest about it.
Yeah, what I agree with you on with that, Henry, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked to Sean just a moment ago, but they're way too focused. Democrats are way too focused. They're as focused on 2020 as Donald Trump is.
Yes.
They really are. And
Maybe
they
more.
ought to go and focus on
2028.
Okay, so why should the voter vote for you? And why does 2028 matter? Without constantly reminding them of 2024. it's not lost on me again that both sides have a reason. One side has the reason to tell you that the 2020 election was rigged, and the other side has a reason to tell you the 2020 election was stolen from. But in both cases, they're terrifying us. They're terrifying people in the middle, thinking, man, is democracy going to be okay? And at some point, that issue just starts to wane. And I really believe that they ought to be focused on what their vision is. But on the question that we were talking about with Sean, we've talked on this podcast about, I think wokeism is dead, if not really close to it. And my reason for believing that, I think the cancel culture thing really blew up in Democrats' face. I think it blew up to the point that many people believe that they were anti-free speech, and now they're trying to argue that Trump is anti-free speech. But I keep watching these issues, and it seems to me that what Democrats ought to be doing is taking accountability for what they've done in their administrations and then asking for change to it as it relates to Trump's administration. Again, as an example, if you really don't like him going after his enemies with the Justice Department, start by talking about how Biden went after some of his enemies with the Justice Department. Just take accountability for it. And that gives the Republicans an opening to agree with you and then to talk about, okay, what do we do to change this? And I look at that over and over again on a whole wide variety of issues. I get it. You know, the Democrats do something at a 10% level, and then Trump does it at a 90% level, and everybody makes it a moral equivalent. But go ahead and take accountability for your 10%. And if you do that, you actually have a chance of opening the door to the other side.
Paul, I agree. I think that they need to change their focus. And it's interesting, your conversation with Sean about the dark money, because it's something I have to say that I never really thought about before. But the thing that it actually brought to mind was the act of voting. We have anonymous voting and anonymous ballots for a reason, that people fear retribution, right? And we give this consideration to people regardless of the partisanship. And that's something that actually had to be developed over time. If you go back to historical cases, voting was, raise your hand in a public room or cast a ballot, and the ballots would be colored for the different candidates so everyone knew who you'd voted for. All these things had to be overcome over many decades in different countries to get to what basically every country has now, which you get to go in a box or a room and make your mark anonymously, give your ballot anonymously. No one has to know who you voted for. I think it's a really important part of our democracy. And I hadn't thought about the contributions as being equivalent, but I think there's a similarity there, that it's a form of speech in a way, the same way as casting a vote. So probably there should be some level of anonymity around it to, I guess, to support Sean's position. My question to you, Sean, is if you had started out as a young conservative activist and the progressives had the money, the dark money advantage that they have now, do you think that you would support freedom of anonymous donations the same way you do today?
I'd like to think that I would be philosophically consistent, but the fact is that before 2010, when the Citizens United decision was passed down by the Supreme Court, the Democrats did have the advantage because there was dark money in the system. There wasn't corporate; it was mostly trade unions and government unions. It was union money that was being sloshed into the system that was anonymous in the sense that the unions could participate in all kinds of levels against Republicans. Citizens United kind of leveled the playing field to allow corporations to play in that space, which the Democrats freaked out about. But then they got smart and they're like, well, we'll just go get our billionaires to do it. And they've done it, on steroids.
Sean, let me play on this just for a moment because I'm interested in this thought. So I forget what you said that they'd called you, the Prince of Darkness or whatever.
Prince of Dark Money.
Prince of Dark Money. I remember during that period of time reading that article and listening to people demonize you, and even thinking a little bit of that in my own mind. Since then, in getting to know you, I know that that integrity is a big issue to you. I'm interested in that in a couple of ways. The first one was, did that create any stress for you going through that issue, that period of time? And the second question that I have is, you've pretty much kept your free market, free trade positions which can't be as easy to hold today as they were to hold when you first started with them.
Right.
What do you do to hang on to integrity when you're being paid to go out and help candidates, or when you're advising candidates on what it is that they should do? So there are two questions in that.
So the first one, I mean, the time of the whole dark money issue, when it was like that ProPublica article that ended up on the front page of the Republic, that was a contentious time for me, or a stressful time for me, more because I was going through a fairly contentious divorce at the time, and a lot of that stuff was being, ended up being reported in that article. It had nothing to do with dark money, but the reporter had figured out ways to get into transcripts of depositions and, dig up all kinds of stuff. So that was a very humbling experience to go through. And, you really do learn quickly who your friends are when you go through something like that. But it didn't stop at all my commitment to my belief system. And in fact, it probably gave me some extra fortitude. And so that is probably the thing that, having gone through that challenge, is made it easier for me to stick to my principles now. I mean, because I can decide, if who I work for and what kind of advice I give. And if it's somebody that I disagree with, then I probably won't work for them. Or if it's somebody that I think that I can agree with, most of the time, and nuance their position and try to educate them and be a part of a solution. I mean, I'm not an absolutist. I really do follow the Reagan model of, if we can agree 60, 70, 80% of the time, that's plenty good enough for me. Because because there's, the left, I will agree with significantly less amount of the time. And I think that's, being sanguine about that is an important part of our political discourse. We get so tribal and mean and extreme. As if you don't agree with everything I believe in, then you are out. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
I spent a lot of time and talking today about the issue of justice and healing. And this is kind of my take. Justice is about who's at fault, right? And so we've got a lot of people who want justice on both sides. That's what they're looking for. And I make it akin to the idea that, hey, my damn house is on fire, and there are two people out in the front that are supposed to be here to save me, and both of them are arguing about who lit the match, right? and I want somebody to save the house right now. Healing is about being forgiving and being accountable for what you've done, and recognizing that you're not perfect either. Any role I might have ever played in that, I just want you to know I'm sorry for it, because again, after getting to know you, I think you're not only a pretty good guy, but I think that you have a lot of integrity, and I appreciate you being here.
If you had ever done that, and I don't think you had, I wouldn't have known it anyway. So forgiven.
All right.
No need to forgive, because it's never happened.
A moment ago, I was asking Henry about this idea about what do the two parties need to do to get us back to the idea of believing that our political system has some hope in it and that maybe we can solve the big problems. How do you view that problem, and what it is that both sides need to do to be successful, or what either side needs to start by doing to hopefully kindle the same thing on the other side?
Concentrate on governing. It is utterly ridiculous that after a year, the Congress of the United States doesn't get around to discussing the budget for the next fiscal year until 2 weeks before the current fiscal year expires. And there is a process set forth in statute about how you're supposed to do that on a schedule that provides plenty of time to get that done before someone threatens to turn out the lights. And when the Democrats were in charge of a unity government, they didn't pass a budget. They waited till the last minute. They governed by continuing resolution. The Republicans are doing it now. If they want to restore faith in our system, do the damn job. And nothing's more important than a budget. So forget all the show trial congressional hearings that you're having. Start debating what should be spent in some kind of level of detail. Recover your power of the purse. And so I think that my own view is you need to elect a different type of person who's more interested in governing than performance politics. And I think it takes, as we've discussed, Paul, and you've led the way on in the state of Arizona, we need institutional reforms to make it easier for those people to get to the general election ballot. But if there's any, in terms of the current cast of characters, genuine interest in improving people's view of our system of government, start making it work.
I completely agree. Congress has abdicated its responsibility in not just the budget, but in actually writing legislation specific to what they want to have accomplished. People talk about the overreach of the executive branch. The Congress has completely ceded that entire thing. This is 100% Congress's fault, and Congress needs to get their act together, do their job, write legislation that's specific about what they want, instead of relying on rulemaking process to implement. And more importantly, as Bob points out, I mean, we haven't had a appropriations process that had all 12 appropriations bills passed and signed into law for more than 25 years. And that's insane.
All right, guys. Sean, thank you very much. We're going to consider you a friend of New Frontiers. You're always invited to come back on.
I appreciate that.
It was a great conversation, and thank you so much. Bob, thanks to you too. Henry, he left early, so he doesn't get a thank you. All right, guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Absolutely. So much fun. Happy to do it anytime.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.